Summer Sweetheart, Chapter 27. Rachel stood up and said, "I'll let the servant prepare the food." Isabel didn't even look at her, and Colin just nodded at her. Rachel's complexion became a little ugly, but she didn't say much. When she passed by Alisa, she stopped and said quietly but solemnly, "Come out." Colin and Isabel was already sitting together, and they didn't know what they were talking about in a low voice. She glanced at them and followed Rachel out. Rachel pulled her into her former bedroom and looked at her with a serious face as soon as she closed the door. "Did you let the video be taken?" Alisa was slightly startled. She did not expect that Colin would believe her, but Rachel did not believe her. In her impression, Rachel is a woman who is completely dependent on a man, pinning all her hopes on Colin, weak and without opinion. "No." Alisa shook her head like a rattle. Her eyes were clear and bright. Rachel is indeed a woman with a little opinion, but she is Alisa's biological mother, and the mother and daughter are connected. She always feels that this is not that simple. "Your dad and your sister trust you very much. Don't lie to them." Rachel frowned in an earnest and serious tone. Rachel was in a bad family when she was young, but she was a beauty and was good at taking care of others, so Colin married her. When she was young, she didn't understand anything, but when she grew up, she understood that Colin would marry Rachel, but he wanted a woman to help him properly take care of the two children left by his dead wife. To put it bluntly, it's just a bed warmer. She wondered what magic power Colin had that could make Rachel step on the ground so desperately. "I'm a little hungry." Alisa lowered her head and looked at Rachel again. She was not sure what she would say. After Rachel forced her to marry into Adam's house, her tolerance for Rachel became less and less. Rachel felt like she was going too far when she saw her. She looked at Alisa, her tone softened a bit. "Come down." As soon as Alisa left the room, her cowardly and aggrieved expression disappeared cleanly. After she married into the Adams family, she didn't want to be involved in the Hunt's family anymore. She just wanted to live a quiet life. However, this family refused to let her go. In that case, let's just wait and see. When she passed the study, she found that the study door was open and there was no one in the room. Did the father and daughter also go downstairs? Only when Alisa walked to the top of the stairs, she vaguely heard someone talking downstairs. Apart from the voices of Isabel's father and daughter, there seemed to be other men's voices. Who else will come to Hunt's house at this time? She walked down the stair curiously, and when she finally saw the man's face, she was confused. Colin had already seen her, and he waved at her to sign her over. His tone was uncharacteristically gentle. "Alisa, come here. Carl asked his cousin to pick you up." Alisa didn't expect to see Luther at Hunt's house. Her face was too surprised to hide. He wore a very sturdy suit today. The tailoring is very expensive at first sight. There is a smile on his handsome face. He sits there casually but exudes a strong aura. Probably because he felt her gaze, he also raised his eyes to look at her. "Cousin? Cousin asked me to pick you up." When he spoke, the smile on his lips deepened a bit, but his voice, that was so low that there was no emotional ups and downs, sounded a kind of inexplicable ambiguity. Alisa opened her mouth and said with a great difficulty, "Oh." But Isabel seemed to be thinking of something suddenly, leaning to Colin's side, whispering something, and while she was talking, she glanced at Alisa. Without listening, she could guess that Isabel must have said nothing good. Carl took advantage of this gap to look at Alisa, and when his eyes scanned her red and swollen face, a shadow of evil prey flashed quickly in his eyes, and his hand on the arm of the sofa tightened unconsciously a bit. No matter how ugly and not good looking Alisa is a woman, he hadn't done anything to her himself, and these people dare to do this to her. Carl glanced at Colin and Isabel, who were sitting there, then turned to look at Alisa with a low tone. Come and sit. Alisa didn't really want to sit there, but the unscrupulous behavior style of Luther made her a little hesitant. She didn't know what he was doing in Hunt's house today, so she decided to follow him first. She didn't believe that Carl would let Luther pick her up. She just sat down next to Luther and saw him turning to look at her with a faint tone. Cousin's face is so swollen. I almost can't recognize you. Only then did Alisa remember that she had been slapped by Isabel before and her face was swollen long ago. Isabel hit so hard that she was numb with pain, and for a while she forgot about it. When Carl spoke, he deliberately or unintentionally glanced in the direction of Isabel and Colin. Isabel was originally a little scared because of the powerful aura exuding from Carl's body. At this moment, when she saw him asking about Alisa's face, her heart trembled and she cast a threatening look at Alisa. Alisa's eyebrows moved, showing a look of fear, pursing her lips and explaining to Luther, I accidentally fell. Such a bad lie can be broken without scrutiny. Carl narrowed his eyes, leaned forward and approached Alisa, saying unclearly, Really? Alisa didn't dare to look at him, lowered her head with a guilty conscience. Yes. Carl laughed and stopped talking. Alisa deciphered 4 words from his laughter, ignorance of good and bad. Luther came in the name of the picking her up. From another aspect, it can be regarded as showing Carl's importance to Alisa. Whether he was sent by Carl or not, Alisa knew that if she told Luther that her swollen face was beaten by Isabel, he would definitely help her. Alisa felt that she could handle the Hunt family's affairs well. On the other hand, it was because Luther was too dangerous and she didn't want to involve him too much. Colin was very satisfied with Alisa's answer and his tone became more gentle. Master Adams came to Hunt's house specially. So let's go after dinner together? Carl leaned on the sofa and said casually, Okay. For Colin, this was indeed a surprise. Although Luther is just a sideman of the Adams family, it's not wrong to flatter yourself. The servant took Colin's mobile phone and said that there was a call for him to answer. Colin got up and went out to answer the phone. Isabel was uneasy and found an excuse to leave. For a time, only Alisa and Carl were left in the hall. Alisa looked around, frowned, and asked him in a low voice, What are you doing? Chapter 28. Hearing this, Carl turned his head slightly to look at her. His expression still sloppy. I came to pick you up. Alisa pursed her lips and whispered like a thief, Don't be fooling around. Whatever you think. Carl smiled, seeming not to care what she thinks. He did not make a special trip to pick up Alisa. He just wanted to come to visit the Hunt family for a while, and the online incidents were a bit big. Although it didn't affect him much, it was troublesome. Alisa is a troublesome wife, but if Hunt's family is too troublesome, he doesn't mind solving it by himself. Alisa wanted to say something more when she saw Rachel and Colin coming down from the stairs, followed by Isabel. The two didn't know what they'd said, and Alisa's eyes were not friendly. Isabel, come over, chat with young Master Adams. After Colin finished speaking, he looked at Alisa. Alisa, Dad wants to tell you something. Come with me. Alisa glanced at Isabel, got up, and followed happily. Isabel walked to the side of Carl and was about to sit down where Alisa had sat before. Unexpectedly, Carl suddenly said coldly, Stay away from me. Isabel's face became stiff. She remembered that the last time she saw this man, she took the initiative to invite him into the villa and sit down. This man also showed no mercy. This man is simply unkind. I don't know what is so good about Alisa's husband. He is still willing to pick her up. Alisa followed Colin to the study. Colin asked her with a serious face, What is your relationship with that Luther? It doesn't matter. Alisa shook her head, looking innocent. The last time you came back to Hunt's house, your mother and Isabel both saw what you did in the car. Colin slapped the table with anger. With a loud pop, Alisa shrank her neck in fright. If you are married to Carl, you have to be what you are meant to be with peace of mind. What is that you hook up with his cousin? Alisa sneered in her heart. She had never seen Colin caring about her so much before. When she raised her head, an innocent expression was put on her face. I don't have one. Colin looked at Alisa, his eyes fell on her face, a touch of disgust floated in the bottom of his eyes. He and Rachel have both outstanding looks. How could Alisa be such an ugly daughter? Had it not been for DNA testing, he would have suspected that Alisa was not his own. She grows up like this, indeed, she has no capital to hook up with men. These thoughts in his heart will naturally not be expressed after all. Alisa is still useful to him. If you don't have it, you can take your sister to Adam's house if you have time, so that she can get to know more friends. As soon as the voice changed, he said casually, Carl's cousin is also good. Colin had said this before, and Alisa asked him with an ignorant expression, doesn't she have a lot of friends with her sister? She still had Norris. What do you know? Colin glanced at her coldly. Go down. Oh. Alisa shrank her neck, turned around and went downstairs with a frightened look. At the dinner table, Colin kept asking Carl's position in the company and who his parents were from the Adams family. I haven't seen Master Adams before in Rostonville. Have you just returned from abroad? Carl raised his eyelids, glanced at Colin and said slowly, I just returned to the country and got a job in the company. There was a glint in Colin's eyes and gentle smile. Then where are your parents? Are they still abroad? Carl was too lazy to pay attention to him anymore and handed the bowl to Alisa. Cousin, help me serve the soup. Alisa looked up and saw a bowl in front of her. His fingers are clean and slender, and they look very nice when they are clasped on the edge of the white porcelain bowl. Alisa was taken aback, and she realized once again that Luther was real family prince with ignorance from head to toe. She took the bowl, raised her eyes, and saw impatience looming in his eyes. She didn't say anything, and she got up and filled him with a bowl of soup and put it in the front of him. Thank you. If the corners of his lips were raised seemingly as if he was smiling, but there was no obvious curve. Alisa looked at him blankly. You are welcome. Is this kind of family prince who can act like this? Colin's words were ignored by Carl. His face was not very good. He could vaguely see that Luther seemed a little close to Alisa. As a result, he felt more and more that it was the right way for Alisa to link Isabel and Luther. So for Isabel's current boyfriend Norris, he is just a spare tire. Colin thought about it and wanted to talk. Carl glanced at Colin calmly, rushed to Alisa and said, I am full. Let's go. After he finished speaking, he stood up and said, Thank you for your hospitality. Although he said thankful words, his expression seemed to be giving orders to instead. This kind of aura is innate, and his defiant appearance is very arrogant, but it is also very charming. Alisa felt that she might have been slapped by Isabel's slap, otherwise how could she find the young Master Luther very charming? Dad, then I will leave first. Although Alisa wanted to leave a long time ago, she still had to do a full set of acting. Colin didn't have time to say what he wanted to say, and he was a bit aggrieved at first, and Alisa directly hit the muzzle. He glared at Alisa and yelled at her with anger, Don't go. Alisa hung her head patiently and walked out with her bag. Colin and the three also went out to send them off. Alisa heard this, opened the door to get into the car, but found that she couldn't open it at all. She looked at Luther in surprise. Carl frowned and his eyes flashed impatience. Fool, you still want me to be your driver? She just didn't want to sit next to him. But when he said so, she had to open the door of the co-pilot and sat in. The car drove out slowly and the cabin was quiet. Alisa always felt that Luther came to Hunt's house today inexplicably. Really, Carl asked you to pick me up? After thinking about it, she couldn't think of any other purpose he could come to the Hunt family. Carl looked ahead without squinting and said indifferently, Otherwise, do you think I wanted to come by myself? Oh, all right.